Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Leap Day. It is my favorite day of the quadrennial, I guess you could say. February 29th, 2024. I hope you all made a very special wish to the Leap Day dragon when you woke up this morning, because I just made up that tradition. And I hope all your wishes and dreams come true. Welcome to Scouching Live. My name is Will. I am Will Scouch, of course. I'm the host of the show. Today I am joined by my producer, Mr. AJ Jadaro. Producer AJ, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
Feeling better than I was on Tuesday.
Yes, our producer, our good friend producer, has been ill over the course of the week, but he sounds extra radio-y now, I think.
Even more so than
maybe,
Monday.
yeah, maybe it's working in your favor a little bit. Maybe this is a turning point in your life where your radio voice comes into fruition and off you go.
Yeah, and then I leave you and make way more money.
Exactly. Now we're talking, right?
Oh,
now,
yeah.
now we're talking.
Now I'm excited.
Yeah, use me as a springboard, man. Use me as a gymnastics tool and just leap over me. Go right ahead. But anyway, we got a really good show. Before we get into it, of course, we're brought to you by Fanatics. You can use our affiliate link below in the description, or you can scan the QR code in the chat in the stream window, and it provides a kickback to the show on anything you buy. You can also support us through Puck Preps, where my co-host Sam McGilligan and I cover the 2006 age group, but there are smart people there covering the 07s, 08s, and 09s, and even some 2010s for all your NCAA and CHL draft prospect needs. And we're also brought to you by Fractal Hockey Consulting, which is my business for hand-track targeted player analysis and recruitment packages for the NCAA, Europe, and beyond, with solutions for any of your organization's needs. And of course, Scouching.ca, where you can subscribe and get exclusive access to innovative data tools with tons and tons of insight into draft prospects and players making their way into the NHL, as well as advanced access to blog posts that are going up there. There was one recently that I put out, and I'm working on another one to put up there for members. And also a really fun Discord server where we watch hockey and do all kinds of fun stuff together. So today, Mr. Producer and I are going to be going through, obviously, the Chris Tanev trade that has kind of continued to light the fuse on the 2024 trade deadline. We're also going to talk about some favorites of the show, making some waves out in the world of hockey. Logan Stankoven with his debut in the NHL, his first 3 games. We're also going to talk a lot about the changes that have happened since the beginning of the week regarding Elias Pettersson. For all we know, he may sign a contract during the show, but who knows? And of course, the other meme of the channel, Mr. Marat Khusnutdinov signing a contract in Minnesota. We'll cover that as well. And of course, should go over the PWHL's new playoff format and draft format, and how that will break down and how that could maybe work out with the NHL. And of course, I'm sure we'll come up with lots and lots of things to talk about regarding the NHL as we go, because that's just what we do. So the Chris Tanev trade. So in case you don't know, Chris Tanev of the Calgary Flames was traded to the Dallas Stars in a 3-team trade. In return, the Dallas Stars sent Artyom Grushnikov a second-round pick and a conditional third that will become a second if Dallas wins the Stanley Cup. And New Jersey also retained half of Chris Tanev's salary as a middleman and gets a 4th-round pick for doing so. So, AJ, I'm curious. I usually am the one talking, but what's your quick thoughts on this move? You know, what's the deal? Who's the up? Who's the down? What's going on?
I like it. I like it for both teams, honestly. I totally understand why Calgary wasn't able to quite get a 1st-round pick, because, you know, you're paying for a rental at the end of the day in Chris Tanev, but I would argue that at some level you got quite a lot that's definitely probably in the ballpark range of at least a 1st-round pick with all the stuff they gave up. I remember watching Grushnikov once in 2021, and It was a ridiculous game. It was like a 44-minute game that he played, because it was like a double overtime that his team was able to win, I think. And he looked awesome in that game. So I'm sure, I mean, I don't know what he's looked like ever since, but from the way that they've talked about him on television now, that he's like this bruiser, maybe he's been corrupted a little bit, but like, I liked him in at least that one viewing. But I look at this trade on a whole, and I think it's just decent value for both sides. Dallas doesn't give up their first, so they still have that to potentially play around with. New Jersey gets in on the action because they may feel that they're starting to slip out of this, so they at least get an asset out of that. And Calgary gets Grushnikov, who we went over a little bit, and some more picks to play around with. So I think all in all, good deal for all teams.
Yeah, it seemed like, from what I could gather from social media after this trade broke, it kind of felt as though Flames fans were a little bit disappointed with kind of what they got from Dallas. And, at the end of the day, to me, Chris Tanev is a guy who is, on the further side of his career than, the Chris Tanev that we all knew, but he's still, there is some credence to, that veteran experience, and he is a pretty stable defensive player still, it seems, from the Calgary Flames games I've seen this year. And obviously it does kind of, stink that there was a lot of reporting out there that the asking price from Calgary was Chris Tanev was a first round pick, and clearly nobody was stepping up and paying that price. And I mean, if you ask me, unless I'm very, very sure that I'm a contending team, I'm not sure that I flip a first round pick for him. But I feel like that may have, inadvertently gotten the hopes up of some fans. But a second round pick from Dallas, that's probably going to be somewhere in the 50 range. And, look, Dallas got Logan Stankoven 47th overall. There probably will be guys that Calgary could just take a swing on with that pick. Calgary has used picks that they've acquired in deals where they kind of just get them in return and just use them on sort of swings like that. Jeremy Poirier was the result of trading down in the draft, for example, and he's coming along quite nicely. To your note about Grushnikov, yeah, in his draft year, he didn't play, which I always thought, that was the pandemic season and things were crazy. But I do remember him when he was in Russia and having watched him there for the purposes of the draft. And I think you're right. Like, the big thing that stuck out to me at that time was just how good of a skater he was, and how easily how easily he covered ice and just got around. And the thing for me is that he plays the game of someone bigger than him, because he is, I think, more of a physical first defenseman, which, it could work. He's still quite young. There's nothing to say that this guy is just a nobody. But between this and the Lindholm trade, to me, Calgary has done a pretty decent job of taking flyers on some guys that could maybe be a thing. Like, Joni Jurmo has had some struggles in Finland, but the tools, can kind of be there. And with Grushnikov, yeah, I think in Calgary, there could be room for him to maybe get a cup of coffee there. They've been playing a bunch of different defensemen sort of interchangeably here and there. And I've always liked Grushnikov just for what he is. I don't think, if you're a Flames fan, I would be over the moon about this deal. But look, Chris Tanev is an expiring asset. He's not cheap, right? Like, he was an expensive contract, so they needed the double retention on him. And at the end of the day, like, how much is Chris Tanev really going to move the needle for your team? Like, Dallas isn't going to play him, I imagine, in the top four.
Oh, they're definitely playing him in the top four.
They probably will.
They kind of have to. And I think, right, like, it gives them more flexibility if they want to even go out and get another top four guy, right? Like, to me, this was the team that made the most sense for Chris Tanev, because I think they can win this year. Right now, as it stands, I think it's going to be Florida-Dallas in the final. And I think adding a guy like Chris Tanev is really big for them. So if they want to maybe, like, because if you want to put Esa Lindell in your bottoms, like, on your bottom pair instead, and find another guy to play with Chris Tanev and just focus on the D, I think that's the way to go for them, right? Like, because they've got great forwards, as we've seen, and we're gonna talk about Logan Stankoven a little later and how much we love that little guy. So they've got a good forward group, and they're really firing. There can even be a little more production from that top line of theirs, which is kind of scary to think about. And Jake Ottinger could also get even better, because we've seen that out of him. So I'm excited to see what they do. I think they might make another move for another defenseman. But I look at it and go, this is a move that's going to actually push the needle. So I'm disagreeing with you for the first time on this show, Will.
Well, I also didn't realize that Tanev is now their second or third right-handed defenseman that's on the team. Like, he is now their third. Yeah, Yanni Hakanpää and Niels Lundqvist are their only other right-hand shots. And yeah, so then I agree. That's absolutely true. Because I do think there is some credence to getting guys who, keeping handedness in mind. I think it's something that matters more than I think people on the internet might think, with regards to like defensemen and corralling pucks and making passes, and centers with how they win faceoffs, and which side of the ice are you on, and how does the handedness of a player affect you relative to your position on the ice, and blah blah blah. So I think that it makes a ton of sense. I don't know, for some reason I thought they had more than two right-handed defensemen there. But yes, that does make a whole lot more sense. And yeah, I think you're right. Like, if I'm Dallas, why stop here? Like, if you think you have a chance, dig into it, right? Like, they do have a deep group of forwards, so I don't know if they need to add more there. But yeah, like, their defensemen, I could easily see Dallas being a team where you look at them going into the playoffs and you go, okay, that guy's on their fourth line, or oh, that guy's on their third defense pair. Like, that's a pretty good looking team for a playoff run, and just kind of sneakily get in there. And they are still getting a ridiculous amount of offense spread across a ridiculous number of players. Like, it's pretty crazy. But for Calgary, yeah, I mean, I think for Chris Tanev, you said it, right? Like, it's a deal that I think works for both teams. All three teams, honestly, like getting a free draft pick to retain salary for the rest of the year. Sure. Whatever. It's a draft pick.
Yeah. And it's not even that much, right? Like, it's
no, yeah, it's not even,
1.5 if I'm remembering the graphic I made.
I believe you're correct. But yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. And if you're Calgary, as a fan, yeah, I mean, Chris Tanev has been there a while. You probably have some level of attachment to him, and you don't want him to just, when there's talk of him going for a first round pick and he goes for a second, an okay prospect and a later pick, around at least a later pick 1 round, maybe another second round pick, who knows. I could see how that's a little disappointing, but when you zoom out a little bit, I think that's a fair amount to get for a guy like Chris Tanev. Especially when you are forced into a position where you have to double retain on him, right? Like, it's an interesting move. And yeah, so I think with Tanev, it makes the Stars better. And with regards to the Flames, I mean, now the writing is on the wall, right? Like, they're kind of accepting that this is kind of the start of at least what would you call it, a retool, maybe?
Yeah, to a degree. I also think that they want to still make the playoffs. It's just that they're not going to commit to guys that only have a year left on their deals.
Yeah.
Like, I expect to see Hanifin moved out, but they're still close enough where they can make it. And we'll see how this impacts them. It'll obviously impact them in a negative way because losing Chris Tanev is losing a good piece. But I'm curious to see if Calgary can still ride what they've got going here recently, and if they can make the playoffs. Kind of doubt it, honestly, but yeah, I think it's a tidy bit of business here from all teams.
It is.
And you know what I'm really curious about?
Yes.
What this does to prices on other guys. Does it increase prices because there are fewer options? Or does it set that market? Like, what does Sean Walker get now? And I have to be the one to mention him because Sean Walker, and I talk about him. I mention his name at least 20 times on every show. So what is that price going to end up being, right? Like, what are other defensemen going to get?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and usually when that happens, it really depends on who wants them, right? Like, if there are 3 teams that really, really, really want Noah Hanifin, then that could drive up the price on him, right? But it seems like with Chris Tanev, that kind of wasn't really the case. It seems like it didn't seem as though there were a bunch of teams clamoring for him, and I don't know if anyone reported that Dallas and Tanev were going to be a match.
Yeah, it was out there for a while that could be a possibility. So, and to me, it seemed like a very likely destination.
It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. But yeah, it'll be interesting too. Yeah, like the deadline just keeps staying very, very interesting to me, even though a couple of the guys that were sort of the top remaining players that are there or that were available are now gone, I think it still could be very, very interesting. And there are players that definitely could come out of nowhere that also get moved, right? Like this
Yeah.
happens all the time where random dudes just move at the trade deadline, like Jakob Vrana trade for Anthony Mantha and a gajillion picks, right? Like Tanner Jeannot for 5 draft picks, right? Like I don't think many people really thought
that
was going to happen,
insanity,
which is crazy, but it's amazing. The other thing too, I just noticed this looking at Calgary's cap friendly. I didn't realize that Oliver Shillington is a pending unrestricted free agent, and that's a guy where he would. I mean, if I've always really liked Shillington. I think as soon as he started finding his feet in the NHL, things kind of just got out of control for him. I believe he got injured and has been dealing with some things back in Sweden that he had to stay home for, that are unclear to me. But he's back now, and playing. I'm a little distracted now because I can hear my cat screaming from upstairs, so that's weird. But but Shillington is a guy who I think could come cheap, maybe if the Flames are kind of like, I don't know, are we really going to keep this guy around? And if you're a team that can afford to maybe not make a run this year, he's a pending UFA for Calgary that maybe is a guy that, if you don't get a Noah Hannafin, you could get a different sort of offensive leaning guy that's more of a long-term bet. But yeah, I mean, I think for Calgary, this just goes further to say that they're going to be in a weird spot though, to me, like, because they've got Mackenzie Weegar signed until 2031 at 6.25, and he's already 30 with a no trade clause. Jonathan Huberdeau and Nazem Kadri, both no move clauses, and they're a total of $17.5 million until 2031 for Huberdeau and 2029 for Kadri. Blake Coleman, almost $5 million with a no trade clause until 2027. It's going to be weird. It's going to be tricky. We'll see what happens with Jacob Markstrom as well. Like that's the other one that I think people are really talking about. I mean, Calgary's kind of making themselves one of the more interesting teams, like long term now. Like with Pittsburgh, I think they're in a similar-ish boat of like where they're at with their organization and like what they're going to do. But I find Calgary just a really interesting team to watch.
That's why I think this is going to be a retool more so than a rebuild.
I agree.
Because they're committed with a lot of money in a lot of places, and
yeah,
I don't remember how long Jonathan Huberdeau has been a point per game for, but I heard from my brother this morning that I think it's been since the All-Star break that he's been on that pace, which, okay. I mean, that's good, but you obviously want that to be extended beyond that, but it might even be longer. I just know he's been on that kind of pace for a little bit of time here now.
Oh, yeah, so I'm looking now. He went on a pointless streak for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He went on a 12-game pointless streak around Christmas. Since the new year, he has had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 20. He's had 20 points since the new year. So 20 of his 37 points have come since the new year, which,
he's been doing a lot decent. Better, right?
He's been doing a lot better. That's better than a 12-game pointless streak.
So I look at it and I think that this team, despite having to sell a lot of pieces off, I think they're going to come back in the not too distant future. They can add good assets. Like, look at the guys they've been able to bring in this year. Like, Pospisil's been great when he's not been hurt. Kadri's gotten better this year from last year. Sharon Govich they picked up for Toffoli. And they've made that work quite nicely. Like, I'm looking at what Calgary's doing, and I'm thinking it's not going to be that long.
No, like Connor Zari's been playing pretty well for them as well. Jacob Pelche is right there.
It's just kind of unfortunate, right, that Noah Hannafin wants out. Like, if he had stuck around, like, we'd be looking at this team, I think, in a very different way. I mean, he's still there, but the writing appears to be on the wall at this point that he's going to be out.
Yeah.
So, if they can find a way to move on from Hannafin, while not necessarily getting so much worse in the process, but very likely that they are, given the fact that you have to give up a player like Hannafin in order, because he wants out. So we'll see what they can do, but honestly, I don't see this be like hindering them super horribly. It just may be like 2 or 3 years from now where we look at the Calgary Flames and go, oh, okay, they might be all right.
Yeah, like I mean, I don't think it's like next year they're going to come back and be a President's Trophy team, but it does seem like they're sort of setting the stage for, adding some stuff that over the next couple of years, could really work for them. Like now they could have 4 picks in the first 2 rounds this year. They got they probably the Sean Monahan trade might give them up or give up their first round pick to Montreal. Just reading through the conditions now. So, but it probably won't. If Calgary's 2024 first round pick is between 20 and 32, Montreal can take that pick. It's very long and confusing, it looks like, so I'm not going to read through all of it. But the point is that Calgary does, have some stuff to play around with, to reboot with, or if they wanted to trade, right? Like if you want to trade a second round pick at the draft for a guy, you could probably do okay, or trade a couple of picks for a guy, and that happens sometimes. So yeah, I think Calgary's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on for sure, because I do agree. I think that they may be in a bit of a weird spot right now, but I don't think it's like a catastrophe, really. Like I'm a lot more pessimistic on paper about like Pittsburgh in terms of the actual ability to win games in moving forward. Like once Gensel is gone, and Malkin gets older, and Letang continues to get older, and Carlson gets older, and Crosby gets older. Like it's gonna probably be pretty rough there. Whereas Calgary, they might have some bad contracts, but I do think that there's going to be they'll sort of figure it out. On the note of the Dallas Stars, you want to talk about Logan Stankoven a little bit here?
Of course I do. Why wouldn't
Yeah,
I?
I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you want to talk about Logan Stankoven?
So Logan Stankoven, I want to talk
Stankoven,
about him so much, I'm going to play some video of how good he is.
Yeah, I know. So Logan Stankoven has played his first 3 games in the NHL, and he is a point per game. I only got to watch the first one that he played. I thought he played really well, honestly. For a guy who, obviously I think the big thing with the NHL, as always, is just that the pace of the game is really, really high. And it's very, very physical. But he's a guy who, again, like, you want to talk about guys that are 5'8", and what kind of helps them become successful. Honestly, he's a great example of just the hard work and intensity mattering so much, right? Like the joke is, oh, does he have the dog? Does he have that dog in him? And Stankoven certainly does. And that's definitely something with smaller skilled players that you absolutely have to see. Like if you don't have it, especially in 2024, the NHL is going to eat you alive. Like it's just, they're never going to give you a chance to have the puck, and if you do have the puck, they're going to come right after you. So good for Stankoven. I mean, I think he's played really, really well when I've seen him in the NHL. Super, super mobile. Obviously the offensive tools are there, but he is no slouch off the puck. Like I think his first goal was scored on the Makar-Girard pair in Colorado. So that's not a bad way to start.
That would have been his second
your career,
because his first goal was scored against Elias Sorokin.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, Sorokin was his first goal. I think it was the second one. But anyway, he's making a big stink, man. I don't know. Like we've always loved him, you and I both, for years.
I feel like a chicken for not putting him higher. I think I committed too hard to the I'm gonna put all my eggs in Fabian's basket and put him all the way at the top, and I didn't leave enough boldness for Stankoven going even higher than I put him originally. Because like we were talking about it before the show, but like where would you put him in a redraft? And I know it's hard to actually just like put that out because a lot of these guys still haven't even played yet. But why don't you tell the lovely viewers that we're doing the show for where you would think about putting him now?
So let's quickly, to give some context, the top 15, I would say, on my list in 2021. This was also the pandemic season, so let's keep that in mind as well. Logan Stankoven, I believe, played 13 games that year or 14 games. Anyway, doesn't matter. At 15, I had Cole Sillinger, Logan Stankoven 14, Fyodor Svechkov 13, Atu Ratu at 12, McTavish 11, Gunther 10, Clark 9, then Edvinsson, Power, Johnson, Hughes, Lassell, Wallstead, Eklund, Beniers. In retrospect, I mean, this draft and the 2024 draft seem very similar, where there's a lot of just good dudes. I would certainly put Stankoven ahead of Svechkov. I would certainly put him ahead of Ratu. I wouldn't put him ahead of McTavish, but I would Gunther and Clark. Maybe he's probably right there with Edvinsson and Johnson for me. So I feel like maybe like 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there would probably be where I would retrospectively put Stankoven. Because I mean, everyone behind him though, I'm like, yeah, I would take Stankoven over all of these guys easily. So that I feel okay about. What about yourself? I'm curious about you because I'm also working on something on my thing here while I'll let you go.
I think I haven't really fully looked at it yet, but he definitely surpassed a lot of the guys you talked about. Like, I'd put him definitely over Gunther. I think for me, I'd probably put him over Johnson. Like, I think I'd have him in the 7 to 8 range now, as opposed to 12 where I had him originally.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd bump him up even more. I just love the kid. And I've mentioned this a couple of times that I also do what Will does, but with Seattle's picks, and I snagged Stankoven with my second rounder, and I felt like a proud papa, even though I'm like 3 years older than him, watching him score all those points.
Yeah, I know. Just for the record as well, Arizona, Buffalo, Carolina. Oh no, not Carolina. Arizona, Buffalo, and Columbus and Detroit all passed on Stankoven 3 times in the draft.
Dummies.
So there's that.
Dummies.
I'm trying to see if there's a team that didn't have the chance to pass him over, and I don't see one yet. Toronto, yeah, they didn't get the chance to pick him,
but they took Nyes, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's fair. The Islanders didn't get the chance to pick him because the Islanders never have any draft picks,
and they took Ratu and then shipped him off to Vancouver.
The Philadelphia Flyers had 46th overall as their first pick. Stankoven went 47th. Philadelphia took Samu Tuomola. Pittsburgh didn't have the chance to draft him.
Tampa probably.
Tampa, Toronto. Vancouver took Danila Klimovich at 41.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I think somebody in our chat here said that they'd still take Klimovich over him.
Yeah. Washington didn't get the chance. So there's a handful of teams that can be excused for saying no to him because they didn't even get the chance to do so in the first place. But the vast majority of the NHL had the chance to add this guy. And I mean, it was also funny too. Like, it seemed like with Stankoven, like, from my perspective, start to like number 1, 2. Oh yeah, the Senators. Jordan Millet's here, and he also says that the Senators. Puck Preps writer Jordan Millet is here, by the way. He said that the Senators drafted 3 times as well and passed on all 3 because I think they took Mads Sogard or something. Like, they took a goalie, I think, and I don't have goalies in front of me on my tracker. But anyway, the point is, like, from what I remember when he was a draft eligible, pretty much everybody on all sides of the spectrum of like how I watch hockey, not me personally, but the metaphorical eye, like everybody has their own idea of what they're looking for. It seems like everybody who actually had been watching Stankoven a lot all seemed to agree that he was a first round pick and at least in the 20s, like at the lowest. Like, I think Elite Prospects had him at like 25 or 26. And there's a few other outlets, but there was a couple that had him a little later than that. The NHL Central Scouting had him 31st in North America. Yes, it was Levi Marilainen. That's true. Sogard was 2019, I think. But yeah, so with Stankoven, so to see him go that late in the draft was kind of a shock to everybody, even the people who go, yeah, I don't know about a guy that small in the NHL, blah, 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 whatever. But it's even those people were kind of going, but if anyone's going to do it, it's probably going to be him. So yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled. I'm really, really excited to see him continue to do what he's doing, and assuming he stays with Dallas. I don't know if he will.
I think he will. I think him and Bork are guys that they view as untouchables, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I just mean in the immediate future.
Oh,
right?
he's definitely he's going to stick, at least for now, because I think Seguin's out week to week.
Right.
And I think that's what ended up letting him come back into the lineup and stay a point per game.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knows, right? Like, we'll see. And Stankoven's a guy who I think, he'll get a chance, I think, every game to put the puck in the net. Like, he's that type of player where he finds ways, right? Like if you want to hit him for a pass and he can take a slap shot quick, he can do that. If he drops a shoulder and goes to the net, he can also do that. He can set up plays deep in the offensive zone. Like you give him a chance or some space to do anything in the NHL, and I feel like he can, find a way to produce something in a given game.
Exactly. And
which you can't really say for everybody.
And as soon as he stepped on the ice in his first game against Carolina, took the puck right up, crossed both blue lines, and got a shot on goal. Like, and it was not a bad chance either. Like, I was honestly thinking, oh, is he going to score right now? Is he going to score right now? Man, so close.
Yeah, and like seeing him play, I think he was on a line with Wyatt Johnston as well.
And Jamie Benn.
That's another guy. Yeah, Jamie Benn. Like the Dallas Stars are just such a interesting team that doesn't really get a whole lot of attention, I don't think.
I think they're getting more attention now.
They're now, yes. But yeah, like they're a team that just, and it's also, I think it's because Dallas doesn't really have like the Connor McDavid, right, who's scoring 120 points this year. They don't have like so much attention goes to the teams that have the guys on it, right? Austin Matthews on pace for 76 goals, right, or whatever it is, 80 goals.
But the Leafs would get that attention anyway.
Right, but you know what I'm saying. I know right? What you're saying. People pay attention to Tampa because of Nikita Kucherov, and there's like a lot of but the Dallas Stars, if anything, are a team where in the playoffs, like I think that they could really go deep because they don't rely overly on a guy or two guys, right? I think with Toronto, a big problem with Toronto over the years has been when one of their big guys are not going, there's nothing happening. Like if they don't have that like backup plan. Maybe this year might be a little bit different, but in any case, like Dallas is just very, very interesting. And Stankoven and Maverick Bourque is another one. They're just gonna stay. They're probably just gonna stay good, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of funny because at the beginning of the year there were a lot of Dallas for Cup predictions that I was seeing out on the internet, and I thought that was a very reasonable take that Dallas could be in that position. And then as the season went on and Jason Robertson wasn't performing at the level he was last year, I think a lot of that idea of Dallas being like this true contender came down a little bit. But now, as we've gotten more to the midpoint here and towards the trade deadline, and like they've been losing quite a bit recently too. I think they've won one of their last 5, and that kind of
they're 4-3-3 in their last 10.
Yeah, right. So like, and it's been a bit rough recently, even though they've looked good. They've also played some pretty good teams in that span, like Colorado and Carolina have been on that schedule. So I think we all recognize them now as a true contender again. It's just they kind of fell out of favor because Robertson and Hintz weren't necessarily producing at the level we thought they might have. And now that they've shored up on defense with Tanev and maybe they can add another piece, like they're looking really good, and I'm excited to see what they end up doing. Yeah, for sure. It's going to be interesting. I do really like what they've been doing over the years, of course. And Stankoven is a great example of like, again, like Stankoven's a great example of if you do your homework, like stockpiling first round picks and just worrying about, who are you going to get or
at third overall? Yeah, right. Like, right. But that's like what I'm saying, I guess, is like people are very, very focused on, my team has the 7th overall draft pick. Who are we going to draft there? Right. But if anything, the teams that I always am more drawn to are the ones that do add those late firsts and second round picks, because every year there seem to be just a bunch of really interesting options available there that, may have some downside, but they have like plenty of tools to work with. And there's just, for one reason or another, they're just guys that kind of slip a little bit. And I think Stankoven's probably the most egregious example recently because of how many teams passed over him and how many teams passed over him multiple times. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's a great sort of example of why I'm why I say that something like a second round pick is a pretty undervalued asset in the NHL, because they get passed around like Costco hot dogs. But you could probably, if you do your homework, you can probably end up with a decent player that may as well have gone 15th if you're playing your cards right. Because the draft, especially in the last, I'd say 10 years, the draft gets really, really even, really, really fast. It really flattens out almost every year real quick. But Stankoven was one of the guys that definitely wasn't part of that flat. He was above it and just slipped all the way to 47. So good for him. We're big Stankoven stans. We're Stanky. We love him. So good for him for making his NHL debut and doing so well. What do you think, AJ? What's next? Quick notes on our boy Marat Khusnutdinov, or do we just step right into Elias Pettersson?
You're already on the prospect talk, so you might as well just give my voice a rest, and you can enjoy your 5 minutes of Khusnutdinov.
Well,
love.
I'll keep it to 3. We'll say 3 at most. But Marat Khusnutdinov has signed a 2-year entry-level contract with Minnesota. His contract with HK Sochi was terminated so that he could jump over the pond and come to North America. Once again, Russian players not staying in Russia forever, and Khusnutdinov jumping straight over to the NHL, maybe. I know they have to get a visa sorted out for him. But what I do know, Minnesota is super excited. They love this guy, as they should. I'm a huge fan of Marat Khusnutdinov, but I would also say that I'm not expecting him to light the NHL on fire, I don't think. But I do think he'll be a good player for Minnesota. Like, I think he'll be an admirable player. I think if you're a Wild fan, he's a guy who may not score a goal every night or score a point every night, but as a middle six center who can sort of help out defensively, transport the puck really, really well, create offense at a decent clip in the offensive zone. Like, he's just a guy who does so many things really, really well, and I've always really been drawn to Marat. And I'm a huge fan of him. I messaged him on Instagram after he got drafted, and he replied, and he was really excited about going to Minnesota and felt like he was going to have a ton of fun when he eventually showed up there. I would also say, for people who are looking at his stat lines and going, oh, well, what about, he plays on a bad KHL team and wasn't scoring a ton. Look at Matvei Michkov, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, I don't think that's what you're getting Khusnutdinov to do, even though I think as well his scoring has been pretty good in the KHL. And when I've seen Sochi this year, he also looks like one of their more impressive all-around players. So I'm really excited for him. Obviously, it's a really exciting thing for him. How do I feel about burning an entry-level year before when Minnesota is maybe in a playoff spot? It doesn't really matter to me, right? Like, he's willing to come. I think he could chip in the NHL, maybe not be a huge player right away, but certainly be around. And I imagine he wouldn't have left the KHL in the middle of the year if they were going to throw him right into the AHL and leave him there. So we'll see what happens with him, but big fan of Marat Khusnutdinov here. And it's good for the brand. So with Stankoven doing well and Marat coming over to North America, it's a good week. It's been a good few days for the Scouching brand. So really, really excited to see Marat Khusnutdinov, a guy who blocked a shot. I believe, again, I'm pretty sure this happened. Blocked a shot with his face, got stitched up, came back, and then blocked another shot with his face, or took a high stick or something crazy like that. The guy's a boss. So excited for him and excited for Minnesota fans. Elias Pettersson. Now we can go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So the story with Elias Pettersson has very much changed in the last 3 days. There was talk of maybe him not wanting to be in Vancouver. There was talk of maybe he just, wants to leave or go, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Maybe he just wants more money or whatever, or just doesn't want to talk to the Canucks right now. It seems like what has happened is, after this sort of started to get a little more searing hot in terms of pressure, he probably just maybe got his agent to just call them and be like, you know what, I do want to stay, obviously, so let's just get it done. Because it has been reported since that there is a deal on the table that they would, I believe it was said by Frank Saravelli, that could be signed in the next couple of days. So a bit of a light version of the William Nylander negotiation, where they waited until literally the 12th hour, until midnight, not literally, well, noon, I think it was noon, or 2 p.m. or something. They waited until like 10 minutes before the deadline and were like, let's just make a deal. And then they'd made the deal very quickly, which always blows my mind. But with Elias Pettersson, obviously it's a little different, middle of the season, and not missing a bunch of time. It just seems like to get away from the drama that seemed to be beginning to percolate. Like I can imagine that if you're Elias Pettersson's agent and your expectation is that your guy is going to stay with Vancouver, and a radio show puts out a poll on Twitter that says, if Elias Pettersson leaves, who do you blame? And the vast majority of people agree that it would be Pettersson. I feel like your agent then steps in and goes, you know what, let's not make this a problem and not make this a distraction, because if he wants to stay, he wants to stay. Let's just make the deal. So maybe that's what's happening. I imagine that makes sense to me. And for Vancouver, I mean, you can't let a guy like Elias Pettersson leave, especially when the team is ripping as hot as it is, even though they're 4-4-2 in their last 10.
I think they're AJ, 1-5 in their last 6.
Yes, they're having a rough go. Would you say they're cooling down?
Yes.
Would you say that the Canucks are cooling down?
Will.
For real this time? For real?
But still,
right.
they're
the phrase
they're
is
a good
the 11th
team.
hour. Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, imagine clickbaiting Elias Pettersson trade. Couldn't be me.
No,
but in all seriousness, I did clickbait that. But I really figured he wouldn't go anywhere, and I'm really not surprised at all that this is the result potentially that we're hearing. Oh, it looks like he's going to extend, because it's so hard to leave a team that builds for you, right? Like when people talked about Austin Matthews leaving or William Nylander and Mitch Marner leaving, right? Like I really thought it wasn't going to happen, because those teams are built for those players. And I understand that we looked at Calgary with Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau wanting to leave and seeing that happen. But I think the vast majority of times, at the end of the day, the player will go with the familiarity and a team that's already put pieces in place to complement them, right? Like anytime I hear anything about McDavid leaving Edmonton or Draisaitl leaving Edmonton, it just blows my mind, because I could never see that happening. Yeah. Same way with Elias Pettersson now. I thought it was a real possibility entering this season that if the Canucks weren't able to have any success this year, that he might be on his way out, just because he said the most important thing for him is to be able to win. And right now, they have an opportunity to do that. So it would seem to go against what he actually wants, right, in terms of being able to win, because they're giving him a chance now to do that, and for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, I agree. I you're right. Like it's always so funny to me when people worry about stuff that never happens. Like,
or rarely happens,
or at least rarely. I think we're seeing more of guys going, I don't want to be on this team because I have my own personal reasons. Because before, to me, at least anecdotally, it felt like those big name guys only really left the teams they played for because the team wasn't doing well, or they just didn't. They had an offer from a contender, right? They had an offer for a contender that they were going to get paid a lot of money and potentially win a bunch of games. But now it seems like it's happening a little bit more often, where people are going, yeah, I'd rather be closer to home, or they're taking personal things more into the conversation. But I mean, for Elias Pettersson, like, there's no NHL team in Sweden, so there's that out the window. But like, yeah, you're on a team that is on a rip, and are they going to be this good next year? I think they have the momentum to at least add more in the summer to remain competitive, because they are kind of coming back to earth this month, but they've done so well to this point that even if they lose like every game for the rest of the year, they're still going to finish with 83 points, and that's like 22 games. So they're looking good. So for me with Pettersson, like, you can't just leave. And you're right. Like, they built the team with him as, like, I think the first guy there out of all of those guys. Maybe Brock Besser was there around the same time, but Brock Besser is not Elias Pettersson.
I think Besser might have been there a year earlier.
Yeah, something like that. They're very close. Yeah, they're very close. And yeah, like, you've got a top 10 scorer in the league on your team. You're not going to let that guy go. Like, he's in the realm of an Leon Draisaitl in terms of points a game this year. Mitch Marner, Mikko Rantanen, Austin Matthews per game. So you're looking at a guy who, yeah, if he signs like a $11 million deal or a $12 million deal, then yeah, that's what it's going to cost to keep a guy like that. But I think if you're going to pay that amount of money, he's probably one of the guys that you offer that to.
Yeah, and I saw a comment about the term being kind of surprising, which I'm also on board with, because in the summer, Elliot said he thought it might be more Matthews-esque in terms of what he would do, maybe going for like a 5-year deal, trying to maximize all the dollars you can, which fair play. If you can do that, go at it, right? But like, to me, I think Elias Pettersson and William Nylander are kind of in the same tier, though I'd put Elias Pettersson a bit above him in terms of quality of player. So I think that he's going to get around 12 and a half, where Nylander's got 11.5. Had to match his buddy David Pastrnak, which I think, I mean, good for Nylander, but Pasternak's a bit better in my opinion, just slightly. But like, I think that's fair value for Pettersson. Even 11.5 is somewhat fair value for William Nylander, even if I would have liked it to come in a smidge lower.
Splitting hairs over a couple $100,000.
Yeah, that's the thing, right?
Imagine
it's like,
that.
what are you gonna do with $500,000 more dollars? Like, it could help. No, but I'm talking about, look, hey man, I'm talking about roster construction, okay? An extra $500K is a lot. I'd be very happy if I got an extra $500K, because that would mean I'm getting a lot more than I'm getting now. More than probably 10 times what I'm getting now. So that'd be great. But I look at it and think, for Pettersson, fair value. And I'm just glad they're going to be able to hold on to him, because to me it sucked. It really sucked seeing Matt Tkachuk leave Calgary. Yes. It sucked seeing Johnny Gaudreau leave Calgary. Like, I want these players to remain on these teams, because that's the fun of it to me at the end of the day. I like seeing rosters be built around the cornerstones and getting to see what these guys can do in those franchises. And obviously that didn't work out in Calgary for those guys, but hopefully, and what it's trending towards here in they're in Vancouver, looks like Pettersson's going to re-sign, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, maybe he signed the deal in the last 30 seconds for all we know, right? But no, I don't think he has. But I agree on that too. Like, it's interesting to see Pettersson maybe go for 8 years, and then I think we'll move on after this. But I mean, yeah, I think there is a part of me that felt and still feels like we're in an era where guys do usually want to stick around. And if they are, like, if I'm an agent, it almost kind of makes sense to go to Pettersson and be like, you know what, maybe you do take a bit of a shorter term, like a 5-year deal or something. And then after 5 years, you go, you up again for probably a lot more money, because I imagine the cap will be higher.
Oh, it's going to be higher.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed, right? You never know, right? Like, there could be, some horrible thing that happens in the next few years that, causes the world to explode again. But let's hope for that not to happen. But I mean, look, if you can lock up an Elias Pettersson until he's 33 years old through the prime of his career, and it costs you, and it'll cost you the most it will cost you next year relative to your cap, then great, good, right? Like, you can do that.
Yeah, you lock up a franchise player.
Yeah. And I just and I also, you said it, right? Like, I can't imagine, like, being here in Toronto, I can't imagine if all of a sudden there was news where it's like, you know what? Mitch Marner kind of is done. Like, he doesn't like the media attention here, and he kind of just wants to leave and won't play for the Leafs anymore. And I feel like the city would melt, for one. I feel like Toronto, well, certain groups of people would probably be overjoyed that he's leaving. But most people, I think, I don't even know what would be happening. So for this kind of thing to happen always does suck. But I'm glad it's not going to happen with Pettersson, because he also just looks really good in a Vancouver jersey. If I may say so.
I mean, he would have looked good in a Hurricanes jersey too, but it's better. It's better that I just think it's better that he's in Vancouver.
It would feel wrong. It would just feel very, very wrong. And he also apparently, I think I read today that he grew up a Canucks fan. So that little tidbit of information, which would also make sense because the Sedins were on that team probably when he was a kid. So, I mean, yeah, if you're a Canucks fan playing for the Vancouver Canucks, yeah, it'd be tough to leave that situation. You'd have to be pretty unhappy if you're on a team that could win the Stanley Cup, the childhood team you love, and you're going to make a buttload of money with them. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I think I'm done. It just didn't seem right to me, but the clickbait is the clickbait, right? So before we go on to the chat questions of the day, just wanted to talk a bit about the PWHL playoff format and the draft format, because it is a very interesting line of thought and a little interesting experiment that they're doing there. So if you're not aware, the Professional Women's Hockey League announced their playoff and draft format. So what will happen is the team that finishes first will select their semifinal opponent from the other 3 playoff teams in the league, and they will play a best-of-5 series in the semifinals and then a best-of-5 final series. So I already, right off the hop, I love that idea. I would love if the NHL had a system where teams could pick who they play. And like it was like an event. I think that would be so much fun. And so for the PWHL to play around with that would be really cool. Granted, there's only 6 teams in the PWHL, so they'll have a limited selection of teams. But the other thing too is the draft. So for their entry draft, I'm really hoping one day Kayla Barnes comes to the PWHL. Always been a favorite of mine. The first draft pick will go to the team with the most points since being eliminated from playoff contention, which is a fascinating idea. So just to spell it out, like if you're a team, nobody in the NHL is eliminated yet. So statistically, it is possible for the San Jose Sharks and Chicago Blackhawks, not the Colorado is probably making the playoffs, but San Jose and Chicago and Montreal and Ottawa, all those teams technically could still make the playoffs, technically. So the game that they're eliminated officially, so after the game where it's literally impossible to make the playoffs, basically their point totals start over again in a way where it's the most points you can generate from that game onwards. The first game you play after being eliminated until the end of the year. The team with the most points in that period of time will win the first overall selection. So if you're a really, really awful team out the gate, you're going to have the best chance to win that first overall pick, but you will also could just be really, really bad, and maybe a team that gets eliminated a week later goes on a hot streak to finish the year. And the more I think about this, and AJ, you can feel free to disagree, but the more I think about this, the more I love it, and the more I would love to see both of these things translated. Like, I don't want to use the PWHL as like a laboratory for the NHL. I think that's, not the way I want to frame it, but I really respect the PWHL for trying something different and trying something unique and trying something that people in a way have been kind of asking for, maybe not from the NHL, but just in general, just kind of thinking that stuff like this would be a better, more entertaining option, because you don't want to see teams tank, right? You don't want to see teams that just kind of give up, trade all their players, and just stop. And I don't know, like, I'm curious of what your thoughts are, because thinking about how this applies to the NHL also makes me think a lot.
Yeah. First, quick correction to what you were saying. It's between 3 and 4, seeds 3 and 4, that team 1 gets to pick.
Right. Yes. It's the bottom 2 teams.
Yeah, the bottom 2.
Yeah.
But I like the idea. And the one thing I will disagree with you on is I don't mind it kind of being a laboratory for the NHL to take ideas off of at some level. The one thing that I look at this with a little, trying to find the word, but I'll just continue on. I just look at it and think, okay, but there's only 2 teams that miss in the PWHL, right? There's only 2 teams that miss.
Yep.
And let's say one team is theoretically in it until the last day, right? And another team's been eliminated well before. It's just going to go to the 6th, like to the 6th place team. So I'd like to see this tried with more teams before I'd be comfortable implementing it, I'd like to see it with more teams, just because I think it'd give a better sample and a better idea of what this looks like.
Yeah.
Like, imagine trying that with, let's say they had 12 teams in the PWHL, right? And it was an 8-team playoffs, and you had that with 4 teams to see how that would go. I think that would give us a better idea of how that could work.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, and I think that will happen. I think that's kind of what the PWHL is hoping for. Like this is just sort of the first year of many. Therefore, they will, in 5 years or 10 years, there will be more franchises, and it'll make a lot more sense, and it'll be a lot more engaging, I suppose. Because you're right, and I think similar things kind of happen in the NHL, where there's a few teams, like 5 teams or so, that are obviously out of it, right? Like they're just not part of it. But then the rest of the teams, there could be 20 teams there that are all sort of competing for those last playoff spots. And so just extending this to the NHL is really fascinating to me, because if I'm a team that is bad, or I know that my team maybe won't be a contender for that year, it almost makes like the approach with your roster construction the opposite of what a rebuilding team does nowadays, where you probably want to be bad right out of the gate. So you probably get rid of the players you're planning on getting rid of at the trade deadline in the summer. So that could ignite a bit of the trade market in the summers, which is interesting. But then at the trade deadline, if you think your team is going to be out of it or is already out of it, you might be in the market to buy for the chance to get the first overall pick, right? Like if the Chicago Blackhawks are eliminated, which I think they could be in the next week and a half if they keep going this way, they could go into the trade deadline if they had the chance, and why not go out and get like pay assets for like a Noah Hannafin and just go for it, right?
Yeah,
like,
I can see that.
It's an interesting thought. I would imagine that they would probably and those teams, probably the rebuilding ones, could also probably, it's like investing your futures for better futures in a way. Like if you're Seattle, right? Not that Seattle's terrible, but if you're Seattle and let's say they were dead last, they have so many prospects and stuff available that they've drafted all over the draft, that packaging them with a couple of picks with Noah Hannafin for the chance to get a Macklin Celebrini, and then you just let Noah Hannafin do whatever he wants after. You don't care if he stays or not. It's an interesting strategy that could make the trade deadline even more interesting. And it also could make it more interesting for the teams trading these players, right? Like Calgary is probably a lot more interested in prospects from Chicago, for a Noah Hannafin trade. They have more to offer than trying to work something out with Tampa, where Tampa has no picks. They don't really have a ton of prospects that they can play around with. So it's just for the purposes of making the NHL more interesting and more, I don't know, dramatic, maybe, it could be a really cool system that really works. And the same could be said about the PWHL, but I agree. Like I last I checked on the standings, there aren't any teams in the PWHL that are really sort of lagging completely behind. So it's not, I don't know if it's going to happen where there's going to be a team that gets eliminated and then there's one team that sort of just gets eliminated last minute. So it's kind of all said and done.
Yeah. But I think the biggest win here out of all of this, like the biggest win of this idea, is that there are meaningful games once you're eliminated. I think that is the best thing that comes out of it, is that once you're out, it's not like your season is done. There's something still to play for. There's something that you're trying to attain.
Yeah.
So in that respect, I think it's awesome. And we also had a comment about the jailbreak rule, where if you score on a penalty kill, that you can get your player out of the box. I think it's interesting, but I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it yet. Like, I think I'd have to ponder that a lot more than, because I don't know. It's probably a good rule and a good idea that if you give up a shorthanded goal, you should have to suffer the consequence of letting a person out of the box. Like, I actually think that it's the right thing to do. But there's still this traditionalist in me that's like, no, can't happen. Yeah. I do not like that change at all. But I also really like it. So I'm conflicted about that.
It is a pretty big change to the rules, right? Like like strategically, that's a pretty big change to the rules, right?
And it incentivizes the power kill more so. You know what? Now I'm all for it. Now that I think about a power kill, now I'm way more into this idea.
Especially if you combine it with no more icing, you can get an icing on the penalty kill. Like, it would be, it's totally different. Like, the strategy would be totally different. But if you had it where if you score a shorthanded goal and also and it ends the penalty, and you can't ice it on the penalty kill, it would, I feel like, encourage just more scoring in general.
Yeah, but you
I
know
don't
what? The
know.
icing
It might
rule,
be too much.
I still
Yeah.
feel like you need to have the no icing rule because at some like you just get hemmed in, right? That way, and
Yeah.
then the power play can change seamlessly. You get a lot
Yeah.
more rest where the penalty killers are stuck out there short-handed even for even longer periods of time, right? So to me,
Yep.
the icing rule, like the no icing rule on the penalty kill needs to stay
Yeah.
personally, but I'm starting to come around to the idea of the jailbreak being a good idea overall. It's
And
like if you're bad enough to allow a team to score on you short-handed, then they should get their player back. It's like catching a dodgeball or catching a
Yeah.
ball in dodgeball, right? And being
Yeah.
able to bring
I
somebody
agree.
back in.
Yeah. And also those rule changes too, I also thought about in the playoffs. Like in the playoffs, if those rules were implemented, penalties that already don't happen. Well, actually, I did the math on this not too long ago. There's actually more minor penalties in the playoffs than generally in the regular season per game. But I think that's because there's just more egregious, insane behavior,
Yes.
and it just raises the floor. Like the percentage of penalties that could be called to penalties that are called is a much lower percentage in the
Yes.
playoffs. But it would make taking a penalty in the playoffs like potentially devastating. Like it's an absolute non-starter. It would be a disaster. Which is, kind of fun. I mean, penalties are literally you broke the rules. So it does seem a little weird to me that part of the strategy of if you break the rules, you can just get the puck and shoot it down the ice and nothing happens. But I see from like a strategic standpoint and from a logical standpoint,
Yeah,
it definitely
you're
should stick
already kind of screwed for 2 minutes where
Yeah.
you're down a guy and you're significantly worse off. So not being able to change those guys frequently makes it much more difficult. The other thing I just want to mention quickly, the jailbreak rule in the PWHL as it stands right now does not apply to major penalties, which I think is a good thing.
Right. Yes, I agree.
And I imagine that in a case of a double minor, it would kill if one penalty, like if both penalties hadn't expired yet, it would nullify one of those and then restart at 2. I'm not 100% sure, but that's based on what I would think, and I'm stupid, so please keep that in mind. That's what I think would happen. But yeah, like I like the idea now a lot more. Like I've talked myself into it. I've talked myself into the jailbreak idea.
For the record, there has been 9 shorthanded goals in the PWHL this year so far. So how much of a boost that's been to league offense, I don't know. But it is a cool rule. I like it quite a lot. And I'm interested to see how it goes. And then the draft and playoff situation, yeah, definitely agree. I think it's a really, really cool system. And, I hope, because I feel like it would work better, like you said, in a bigger league. And, everybody screams and complains about the draft lottery every year, and I hate it. Like, no matter how many times the NHL changes the rule, no matter how many times the NHL changes the rules about the draft lottery, there's always a sizable enough amount of people so mad about it that they just complain and complain and complain that they change the rules to suit them, but then it opens up a gap for something else. Like, I love it. I love it, but I also hate it. And it would be really nice if instead of all of that complaining and sadness and discourse, we shifted over to our team is still trying because we want to win.
You
games.
Also know at the end of the day, people would still complain about it because they would go, "Well, my team got eliminated 2 weeks later, and they got an unfair advantage that they could continue like pile up points, right?"
Yep.
And there are teams that are good during garbage time. Like the Ottawa Senators would win the first overall pick every year if that were the case. Okay, so there'd be people would be upset about it. Right.
Yeah.
To me personally, with the draft lottery, I want it as random as possible. I would increase the odds of like the 16th team getting the first overall pick. Like to me, I want more potential chaos. That's the way I look at it. I think that's the best way to do it. More chaos that way, right?
Yeah,
like I also understand that at some level, we got to try and make sure that the teams that are bottoming out have some sort of pick safety, like that they're going to get a decent level pick, but I'd make every pick a lottery pick because I'm nuts.
Well, and just for the record, we do that. So the Scouching community actually has a fantasy
Oh, so
hockey
that's
league
why I do so well in these drafts.
yes, and that's what we do. We give the NHL's lottery odds to the teams, but all 15 picks are thrown into the lottery. So what happened last year? I think this was last year. Yes, it was, because you got Adam Fantilli.
Yes, I did. After lobbying to you privately. So
yes,
please
yeah.
just give me the second overall pick.
Yeah,
I
there
promise there were no
definitely.
shenanigans. I just
Definitely
got
no
really lucky, and it's
Yeah.
hilarious. I have Fantilli and Cooley in back-to-back years.
So for the record, last year in our draft lottery, the worst team won the first overall pick. Then AJ won second overall, but was the fifth worst team. The 11th worst team then drafted third. The third worst team drafted fourth. It was kind of the second worst team drafted seventh. The sixth worst team drafted 12th. But generally, other than that, everybody was kind of within the same range they should be. So like that I mean, obviously a team that finishes second last with the 7th overall pick would piss off a lot of people, I think.
It would be awesome. It'd be so cool.
But it would be awesome. It would be awesome, and it would be like, you know what? But it's like, this is why you don't tank.
Yeah, and
right?
It would, like even have Pittsburgh's getting the 7th overall pick. Like, yes. And that would make things so much easier for them, where like you don't end up having these crazy issues with rebuilding your teams necessarily, because it's, oh, you finished 15th one year, oh, here's the 6th overall pick.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think would be awesome.
Yeah, and in a sense, the new system, like the points since elimination system, you know, I don't know if it will solve the tanking problem, right? Like, it'll be a race to the bottom earlier, I think. Like, teams, if they, like Chicago knew, I imagine, going into this season, that they were not going to be a super competitive team. So would they make themselves less competitive to start the year and then start to turn it on around, you know, February, March, right? Like, it would be interesting to see how that would play out to me. But I agree. I would really love to see just every pick in the lottery just selected by the lottery system, and just the takes and the madness and the chaos would be absolutely gargantuan.
You know how awesome it was
so
when
amazing.
Team E won the first overall pick in 2020? That was so cool. That was so cool. The Leafs had a chance at Lafreniere because they made the play-in. That is so dumb, and I loved every second of it, that Team E won the lottery. That was so awesome. And I want more of that, but more on a level of Pittsburgh moves from the 16th seed to the 7th seed. I just think it'd be awesome. And that way, you know what? Just make it random, because at some level, it's like, these guys don't get to choose where they go. So you shouldn't be able to really have so much influence. Like, there should be odd scaling to teams that are lower end, but make every pick a lottery pick, please. Just do it. Chaos.
Yeah. So we'll get into the questions in a sec, but we got to do the mid-show ad read. So we're brought to you by Fanatics. You can use our affiliate link below in the description, or scan the QR code in the chat window to provide a small kickback to the show on everything you buy in the store. You can also support us through Puck Preps Hockey, where you can get all your NCAA and CHL prospect needs. You can also support us through Fractal Hockey Consulting, which is my business for hand-tracked targeted player analysis and recruitment packages for the NCAA, Europe, and everywhere else. If your team has needs, we can provide solutions. And of course, Scouching.ca, which is this website where you can get exclusive access to data tools that are unparalleled and don't exist anywhere else for draft prospects, as well as players making their mark into the NHL. So let's get into the questions. Right off the bat, we got Dave Phillips, you know, always the attentive listener, watcher, whatever you want to call it. Asking about Yegor Solovyov, an overager from CSKA Moscow. I have seen this player a little bit. So Yegor Solovyov was undrafted last year. I haven't seen him in a long time. I honestly haven't watched Krasnaya Armia in a long time. But Solovyov has been a guy that has stuck out to me here and there. He has played in the KHL in bits and pieces this season as well, for, 15 seconds here, 3 minutes there, 6 minutes there, 0 minutes there, typical KHL stuff. But he has been having a really, really good season this year. I haven't seen him enough to really give a detailed breakdown, but he is a guy who I have noted in the past of I should probably circle back on this guy before the end of the season. So just because of you, David, I will, even though all the guys you like stink. I'm starting to doubt Levshinov, especially with his defending. Do you think there's room for him to improve? And do you think another year at Michigan State would be good? Yes. So you're right. I actually watched a Levshinov game in the last couple of days, if I'm not mistaken, on the sheet here. Yeah, so Tuesday, I did another game of Artyom Levshinov. And, I mean, look, the problems have been there every single game I've seen him, right? Like, or you can forgive the defenseman like him being a guy who jumps into the offensive zone and wants to run offenses and like he at times plays like a rover. Like there were in the game I did on Tuesday, there was a moment where he jumped into the rush and a winger dumped it into the offensive zone and he was F1. He was there first and jumping in after the dumped puck and no one else was anywhere near him. And then I think the puck came back for a 2-on-1 after that, which is so Artyom Levshinov hockey. It's insane. Part of that might be Michigan State and how they play. For sure. They are a bit more of a, puck carrying possession offensive team. But with Levshinov, though, the issue I have is he is, the word I would use is not lazy, but the word I would use is like,
careless.
Like no, it's like what he has is misappropriated, right? Like I think the thinking is I don't need to be the most mobile defender because I'm big and can hit people, which is fine, but when he hits people, they get through him. When they attack him with evasiveness and skill and things in the NHL that are going to happen, that's when things kind of start to fall apart for Levshinov, which is legitimately troubling for me. But I'm not super scared about it, though, because he is a pretty strong skater. I wouldn't say the most fluid or mobile guy, but he has some power behind his stride. He gets around the ice pretty well. And look, the other thing, too, is that there's a lot of points on the board for Levshinov, but in the games that I've tracked, of which I ignore low-level teams, I think. Let me double check what I've done with Levshinov, but if I recall correctly, the first game I did, he played Canisius College, which is not a well-known school, or not a high-level sort of NCAA program. And in that game, he had 6 pass attempts that went to the slot and 0 shots. Since that game and the 3 that I've done since, he has had 1 pass to the slot and shot the puck 7 times, and all of them are from the perimeter. So if you're thinking that this guy is easily projectable as an offensive defenseman, it just, at 5-on-5 at least, in the games that I've seen and the games that I've tracked, it is not as much there as you think. To me, what I've thought lately about Levshinov too, and I'll move on after this, but what I've been thinking lately, and this might just be because how he looks when he skates, but he kind of reminds me of like Dion Phaneuf, but reincarnated in 2024, where Dion Phaneuf was not the most mobile defensive player. His defensive results were not fantastic. But Phaneuf was a guy who just could hit like a train. He wanted to play physical. He wanted to be involved and get into the greasy areas. And Levshinov does do that. And Dion Phaneuf, though, his offensive game was just absolutely hammering the puck from the point, right? Like that was his thing. With Levshinov, that's not, it's more of a modern twist on that, where it's not just bombing it from the point, but it's stepping up into the offensive zone and just trying to be a fourth forward on the ice at times. Is that going to work? I don't know. Levshinov is a guy who I think is going to go in the top 5, top 4, probably be a fine NHL defenseman and come a ways in terms of physical development and actually winning those physical battles a lot more. And to answer your question, I do think another year at Michigan State would be good for him. I certainly wouldn't immediately throw him in the NHL. And the AHL, I mean, I don't know. I feel like another year in college would not do him any harm. But again, like, because he doesn't look like quite a dominant defenseman, right? Usually you want someone who has outgrown their competition, but Levshunov at times does still struggle in the NCAA, even though he has a ton of points this year. But yeah, there's absolutely room to improve, right? Like, I'll never say that any player doesn't have room to improve when they're 17 or 18 years old. Like, he can get better at these things, right? It's just going to be a matter of how much better does he get and how much better does everybody else around him in the draft get? Because I think there's a lot of guys who could go a few picks later than Levshunov that have just as much upside and maybe not as much of a questionable profile now. Thoughts on the Capitals prospect pool? That is a team I have not thought about in a while, and I'm going to kill some time before I pull up my drafted prospect tracker, accessible through scouching.ca with a partner level subscription. It is a big sheet, so it's taken a while to open here, but the Washington Capitals. So the Washington Capitals on paper are sitting in the bottom 5 teams in the league, but they do have some good names available. The ones that stick out to me, obviously, are Ryan Leonard, Andrew Crystal, and Ivan Rozhnashenko. I'm kind of a fan of Alexander Suzdalev, but I'm not sure there's an NHL player there. I still have faith in Brent Johnson. I watched him a bit after someone asked about him during the show with Ohio State. I thought he has been playing quite well, but he is still a guy who I think I have him listed in here as a maybe if we're thinking prospect pyramid level type things. Like, I think he's one rung above sort of the everyone else kind of level. Hendrix Lapierre and Connor McMichael. I mean, Connor McMichael's having a pretty good season in the NHL, but he'll be turning 23 for next year, so he'll age out of this tracker. Hendrix Lapierre, he's been a serviceable NHL guy, which is fine. You know, the Capitals also haven't drafted a whole lot lately, I don't think, in the draft. They haven't had a ton of picks. But they've done, I think, in general, done pretty well. I'm a fan of Ludvig Persson, who's playing in second division Finland, which is not a great league, but he's doing very well there. But Ryan Leonard, you know, look, he's I watched him a little while ago. He's still Ryan Leonard, intense physical guy, great shooter. You know, he if he can find some space, he will put the puck in the net. And he grinds hard. He does a lot of things well. Andrew Crystal, he's still very much the same. His skating is a little bit better in terms of turning off pressure, making quick turns to create space for himself, all those things. And but the tendencies and the lack of real foot speed and physical resilience are still an issue with him. But again, like, for drafting him in the second round or whatever it is, early second round that Washington did, I'm not super concerned. So Washington, you know, when I look at the actual players on this list, I do think they're a little bit better than a bottom 5 program in the NHL. But I do think that, you know, there is some room for more to be added. But they're definitely not, you know, like, they're down there with like Colorado, but Colorado's only that low because they don't have any guys that they've drafted over the years. Their list of players is about 18 players long. So it just by default will put them down there. And Washington, I think the Washington is kind of like Detroit, I guess is what I'm saying, where Detroit in my data may not look so good, but the good players there, I think, make them look a little bit better. And with Washington, the players that are at the top do make them look a little bit better. Brady Tkachuk trade rumors tossed out from Wit. What's your take? I saw this. Steve Staios basically came out and said it was BS. Steve Staios himself basically was like, this is not happening. Like, Tkachuk's not going anywhere. And it's kind of up to him to trade people. I will also say, though, he was a lot more tepid about Jacob Chychrun. So with Jacob Chychrun, you know, there was rumors that teams were calling about him and that there might actually be a deal that comes to fruition here. And the way that he phrased it was that it was disappointing that word of these things came out. So it's not like he was saying we're not planning on moving him, but, you know, we are getting phone calls and it's sad that whatever. But he said that, you know, if I was other team, I would be calling about him as well. And so, you know, conversations happen and names get out, but you know, so it just seems like there was a little bit more of a serious rebuke from him when it came to Brady Tkachuk.
Yeah, I doubt either of those guys are moving.
Yeah.
Chychrun, it's possible, but you'd have to pay a king's ransom. Like, even more so than what Pavel Buchnevich is apparently being shopped for. Like, Buch is being shopped for 2 firsts, which, if I'm a contender, I'm doing it. But, like,
Yep.
Chychrun's going to be more because his contract is very cap friendly. And
Haha.
no, but it's true. It's like he's a really, for what he is, like his contract's pretty good. So
Yeah.
I
You
just
just
don't
said the
see it.
thing, but I thought it was funny. Yeah, I don't see it either. And I feel like Ottawa doesn't really. I mean, it also, this article also mentions that Tarasenko is a guy that might be on the move, and that I probably would agree with.
I think there's like an
I think
100% chance
yeah,
almost.
there's yeah
99.99% chance he's being
yeah
moved.
yeah for sure. Yeah.
Now somebody's
But
going to
yeah, I
edit
don't.
that and say that we said Brady Kachuk is getting moved, 99% chance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Can't
totally.
wait till Rayanne does that.
Yeah, our graphic designer loves to troll.
Exactly.
David Phillips again. Have you seen any Ilya Pautov? Looks awesome in the MHL and plays hard. I really like Ilya Pautov actually. I don't know if I buy NHL player there. Because again, he plays in a pretty soft league. But I agree with the assessment. Like, he does play hard. He moves quick. He's an intense player. Closes gaps, forechecks well, carries the puck well. He's got a lot of skill, which I really like. Like, Pautov is a guy who's kind of flirted on and off my list all year. He's on my watch list now. He's not ranked, but you could do a lot worse with like a 7th round flyer and you leave him in Russia till he's 24, 25. And I think you could get something out of him. But I still wonder about true NHL upside playing the way that he plays. Because you got to be really, 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 really good to play like that style of play and be not the biggest guy on the ice. But I have really liked him. Of all the guys on CSKA, their junior team, he has been probably the standout that I would note the most, outside of maybe Matvei Shervin at times. But if you want someone exciting, you probably look at Pautov. Jordan Millette. Oh God. How is Mr. Will doing today? I am doing fine. I had a really awful night's sleep the other night. The cat would not let me sleep, and there were big thunderstorms down here in Southern Ontario, which really sucked. But I got a good night's sleep last night, feeling pretty good. I don't know what else is going on. Not much, I'm just living it up, man.
Yeah,
living it up.
Thanks for not considering me, Jordan, or asking how my day is, huh?
Well, I don't know.
It's okay.
Maybe he just doesn't like you. I don't know. Just not a fan.
Yeah, well, he trolled my brother's Instagram page when he had when he was more active.
It's true.
See?
Well, maybe he should. There you go.
I know how Jordan feels about my family then. No, I love Jordan.
Oh God.
It's okay.
Who doesn't?
He needs to come back and play Catan so I can finally beat him, because he only played once.
Yeah, it's true.
I've beaten everybody I've played from the Discord, so
It
come
is
back,
true.
play another game of Catan against me, Jordan. I'm raring to go.
There's a lot of talk about Stankoven in here. I'm still sick. We chose Klimovich over him. Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, but Klimovich had 6 power play goals at the under 18s, so therefore you got to go with the guy who scores goals, right? What about Maverick Bourque? Can you give us a rundown on where he's at in his development and how he projects if things go well? Man, Maverick Bourque is just such a good hockey player. You and I watched him a while ago, just to see him in the AHL, and the thing about Maverick Bourque that, we talk a lot on the show about how Quebec maybe is lagging behind other areas of Canada in terms of developing sort of high-end NHL talent. And why? I mean, I had Maverick Bourque, I think, at 12 or 13 on my list when he was a draft eligible. And I still, obviously I feel pretty good about that. But the reason I had him there while still having these thoughts about hockey in Quebec was because Maverick Bourque kind of just, it didn't matter how the opponents tried to play him. He didn't just have a thing that he did. It was a really amazing grasp of things that need to be done to move play in the right direction, right? Like, if he had a lane to carry it, he would carry it. If he had a lane to pass it across a blue line, he would pass it. If he recognized pressure in the defensive end, he found a way to time spinning off that pressure and knowing what pass option he had in mind. He just seemed to have such a great grasp of what he was capable of what was happening on the ice and what was coming his way and how he could work around it with what he has. Like that's and I think that's a tough thing to spot unless you see a player for a long time. Like Maverick Bourque was a guy who was a first round pick for me for a while, like later on, I think, on my list. But then as the year went on, the more I watched him, the more I went, yeah, you know what? Maybe this guy is one of the smarter, more capable playmakers in the draft. And, not sure about how his ability to score will translate, but he's a guy who is one of these dudes that makes other players' lives easier, which is something that I always really, really value. So yeah, with Maverick Bourque, I don't think he's going to be like a superstar in the NHL, but if he hits in the NHL and it works out, like I could see him being a good sort of middle six Swiss Army knife. Like the way he plays, I think could work on the wing. I'm not sure about a center in the NHL. Maybe I would give it a shot, but I think that more likely just because of the pace and physicality of the NHL and the added responsibility there for a center. I'm not sure Bourque is quite that, but I mean, it would certainly not hurt to try because he's been great all the time, every single place he's played since he was drafted. So yeah, I remain a big fan, and I hope he has just as lovely an NHL debut one day as Mr. Stankoven has had. Did you ever figure out what the Stars saw in Wyatt Johnston that everyone else missed? Was it the pandemic that let him fall that far? So, I've thought about this a lot too, because Wyatt Johnston was one of the only players, I think, that did not play that when a team drafted them, they nailed it. Dallas, when they drafted him, I remember my reaction at the time was, oh, like he hasn't played. And if you're going to use a first round pick on a guy who hasn't played, you got to trust that they're sure, like you wouldn't do that unless you were really sure about what you were doing. And so with Wyatt Johnston, and the thing I said at the time too, is like, if that pick had been Logan Stankoven and Wyatt Johnston went in the second round, then whatever, who cares? But they look amazing then too. But Wyatt Johnston, I remember, I'm trying to think back to that time, but I remember watching some of the video of him that he did have when he was with Windsor the year before. And I really I thought he was really good there. Like I thought for a more, like he was really slender, like you could tell he was very physically underdeveloped, but the skill level was there. And when he was scoring, it was from dangerous scoring areas and all of that stuff. But I'm still just very surprised at just how far he's come. Like I remember watching him at that under 18 and thinking he was fine that year in the pandemic, but also it also holds to reason that if you're a guy who hasn't played a competitive game at all year long, and then you go to the under 18s and that's your first exposure to competitive hockey that year, that you could maybe be forgiven for maybe not looking super great. Like the more and more I do this, the more and more I really think about how a player is playing when they've missed a bunch of time. That's why I'm kind of really interested in a guy like Kiwi Harju when he comes back from injury and everything. But with Wyatt Johnston, I mean, you got to give credit to the Dallas Stars. They did a great job, sort of figuring him out. Honestly, and when I go back to watch, I've gone back and watched a bit of him, and it's just, again, it's just the application of the skill level that he has, and he does have that instinct to get to scoring areas, right, and create around scoring areas. He's not a guy shooting from the perimeter and pucks are just going through goalies, right? Like it was good stuff that could work. It was just a matter of physical development, and it seems to be doing just fine. Has Svechkov been solid? I think he's been a lot better this year. I've seen a little bit of him with Milwaukee this year when I've tuned in a little bit here and there, but I can't say I've seen a tremendous amount. But the fact that he's, up to 33 points this year, I think he's not getting a ton of attention. I think he's among their leading scorers on the team. Yeah, he's the fourth leading scorer on the Milwaukee Admirals behind Zach Leroux, Yegor Afanasyev, and the one and only ultimate Canadian high school hockey alumni, Mark Jankowski. But yeah, but Svechkov is having a pretty good year. Denis Gurianov is behind him, but he's a point a game. But Fyodor Svechkov is having a pretty good season on paper. And when I've seen him with Milwaukee, yeah, like Svechkov was always going to be a bit of a slow burn guy to me. He doesn't have the flash and the shine of a lot of other players, but the reason I liked him a lot was just how smart he was and how well he read the ice and doing it against men in Russia. Like, there's a lot of interesting things that he did really, really well. That, he was a step ahead of Stankoven on my list, but Stankoven was the more exciting player, the more physical one, the more intense player. But I felt that Svechkov just kind of had a really good grasp on, kind of like Maverick Bourque a little bit, where there's just a really good grasp of the game. Just maybe not quite on the same level as a Maverick Bourque. But yeah, he's having a good season. What would Levshinov and Buyem's production look like in Parek's spot on Saginaw? Well, I mean, Artyom Levshinov kind of gives me vibes like Minchikov would. Like, Minchikov last year on Saginaw is probably kind of what Levshinov would look like this year. Maybe just not as skilled, and not as maybe not as passive defensively. Like, Minchikov had a lot of moments where he was sitting back a little bit too much, and Levshinov just is very, very, is a lot more active in terms of, finishing checks and hitting guys. I feel like Zeev Buyem would be like a really productive player on Saginaw. I watched him yesterday. A guy who just has a lot of skill, a lot of sort of that unpredictability in his game in a good way. Really, really just a clever puck mover as well. I have Buyem quite a lot higher than Parek because I feel that Buyem is just a more stable influence on the ice than a Parek is. I feel like he's much more of a calculated offensive player rather than Parek, who in my work has been very reliant on shooting from the point. That's been the vast majority of his offensive output, has been point shots, which is, to me, fine. You can generate points that way. But I feel like with Buyem, you would see a guy who brings a little bit of a different style of offense to the table that could work just as well. Marat Khusnutdinov is the reason I'll continue to watch the Wild this year, even if they're practically eliminated next week. Yeah, I mean, they're still sort of hanging in there. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. They're hanging around, but it is going to be an uphill battle for sure. But yeah, Marat will be a nice little piece to pick up, and good to keep an eye on him. While we're talking about Russians, what's the sustainability of Dmitry Voronkov's game? So this is from Locked On Blue Jackets. I'm not sure if this is Mr. Jay Forster on the line there, but if it is, hello. Always a pleasure to see you on here. But yeah, Dmitry Voronkov, I've really liked him when I've seen him this year. We did some work with Columbus before because he is among the leading scorers on the team. Like, if you told me that, Dmitry Voronkov would be, scoring more than Boone Jenner or Cole Sillinger, it would be a little silly to me. But, I think Voronkov plays a style of play that, this is kind of what we'll probably get for the rest of his career. Big, but well-rounded, sort of physical, resilient center who can get to the dirty areas. He does the things that NHL coaches need guys like him to do. And through that, obviously, here and there, he's going to get chances to score. I don't know. I haven't seen enough of him to say, I think he's going to be a 40-point guy forever. But I feel like the way that he plays is kind of pretty much meat and potatoes, but in a way that I think works in the NHL. So either way, I think for Columbus, they've found a pretty useful piece to have on the team. And for a 4th-round pick in 2019, you could do a lot worse than a Dmitry Voronkov. And I'm just thinking now, Dmitry Voronkov, he's an interesting one. And I don't remember watching him at all when he was draft eligible. But he's certainly looking like he's certainly looking like he belongs in the NHL, and he's certainly beefy enough, being 6'5", 240 pounds, which is crazy to me. That's, he's 4 inches taller than me, 4 or 5 inches taller than me, and about 50, 60 pounds my heavier, which, I mean, that's a big boy. That is a big boy. And yes, Sean, the 11th hour is the phrase. Yes, thinking on my toes is not a strong suit, which is a great thing to say when you're a live stream guy. I'm happy with Pettersson. Dreger said his sense is that the deal will be in Nylander range, but I would assume he gets a bit more. What's your prediction? I guess 8 around 12.5. I think you mentioned a prediction of what that. Yeah,
we went over.
We kind of went over that. Yeah,
because now
we did.
My idea is we just get through questions during segments, so we can get to more stuff. So we set around 12.5 to 12.
Yeah.
By 8.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about the power play rule. Do you think Juuso Valimaki would benefit from a change in scenery? Seems like a guy with second pair potential. He's been fine with Arizona this year. I think he's kind of proven to the league that he can at least be a depth guy. Like he can be on your third pair and be fine. And I mean, when I've watched Arizona, like they have other players that I find are more concerning in their own end. And I think Valimaki, like, he's kind of been on a journey where he's trying to find his role. Like early in his career, he kind of was this more offensive leaning guy, and that kind of just wasn't really working for him. And it just kind of ended up with him losing his job, which sucks. Obviously, you don't want to have that happen. But it seems like with Arizona, like again, like I really like Andre Tourigny as a coach. I have for years. And I think that he's the kind of person that's able to sort of spot that, like, maybe this guy just needs to approach the game differently and use what he's got a little bit differently. And sort of set his sights on finding like a more limited specific role that does work for him. And I think he does play that more, mobility first. He's got a bit of skill, but it's more about just making those quick passes, those simpler plays, maybe not biting off more than he can chew, and just being more of a dependable, solid guy, because there's nothing wrong with that. And I think he's shown with Arizona that he's at least capable of those things, even though Arizona has been god awful for what feels like a billion years. So I cannot wait for them to beat the Toronto Maple Leafs tonight in a 3-2 overtime win or something.
Without
like
Clayton Keller.
Without Clayton Keller, exactly.
Breaking so the 13-game losing streak.
Yeah, like Liam O'Brien will score a hat trick tonight or something crazy.
Nah, it'll be Michael Carcone if he's playing.
Josh Brown
or Alex Kerfoot.
Josh Brown with the overtime winner.
It's got to be all Leafs. It'll be Kerfoot, Carcone, and Dursey, because Sean Dursey's a little rat, so he'll score the winner Sean and just like stick his tongue out.
Yep. Oh, I miss Sean Dursey. He's such a fun player.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think that was the Muzzin deal.
It was, yeah. You got Jake Muzzin, right?
If it was the Campbell deal, then but if it's the Muzzin deal, then
I know.
It was a good move.
It's just fun to watch. I just really like watching Sean Dursey.
I love him. I think he's great.
Yeah. What is Peyton Krebs? Peyton Krebs, I mean, I watched a Buffalo game the other day, and I kind of noticed Peyton Krebs a few times, but he seems like a guy who really, really good transitional player. I look at a Peyton Krebs and I maybe see a guy who may not score a ton for you at the NHL level. Like this is his third season-ish in the NHL, essentially. And he's been a guy that doesn't, he's maybe a 30-point scorer. This year he's on pace for 15, which is not ideal. But to me, Peyton Krebs's real advantage is his transition play. There's a player in this year's draft that's kind of similar in Ole Josefsson, who's a guy who, the offensive production isn't quite there, but boy, is he ever a good puck transporter, right? Like the skill and the speed really benefit him. And I think that that's kind of what Peyton Krebs is. I don't know off the top of my head who he's been playing with this season. I don't know, AJ, if you know either. But he's playing he's playing like 10, 11, 12 minutes a night, which is not a ton. But to me, like he is kind of settling in as maybe more of that third line transition speed first type of player. Like a guy like Peyton Krebs is, I guess what I'm saying is a guy like Peyton Krebs could probably be on my bottom 6, like on my team, like if it were me, just because of how good he is in transition and how good he is at transporting the puck out of danger, which, for a bottom 6, that's kind of what you want, and doing it with control of the puck, which is good. And anything beyond that is a bonus. Thoughts on the Seattle Kraken prospect pool? It's very good. They've drafted a ton, and they've drafted a bunch of guys who score a lot of points. Is it going to work? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of guys in the Seattle system that could work out. Like I've watched a lot of Riker Evans this year, and he's been a guy who is again like settling into that stable NHL role and looking okay doing it. But I mean, Shane Wright is looking okay. I haven't seen a ton of him this year, but it's fascinating. Shane Wright is a fascinating case study for me, and we can get into it later another time. But he is one where I still think like there's a lot of potential with him. Like you can see him as an offensive player. There's a lot of potential. I felt that when he did play in the NHL, he did look better than his point totals would indicate. I think that it's just a matter of being a guy who's comfortable offensively enough to slot in their top 6 or top 9, which I just don't think he's quite there yet. But yeah, so with Shane Wright, it's a weird one, but I do really like Yanni Newman. Jagger Furcus, I've loved this year. I thought he's been playing great. Carson Rakoff is having a great season with Kitchener. I think he's a big reason that team has been so successful. Ty Nelson is being Ty Nelson. He's still doing okay. David Goyette, also having a really, really good season with a powerhouse Sudbury Wolves team. I saw him the other day playing on a line with Kieran Walton, and he looked really good in that one. Oscar Fisker Molgaard has been getting a lot hotter as the season goes on in Sweden, and everybody knows that I was a fan of him a lot last season. So yeah, they have a lot of really, really good names out there. Tyson Jugnoth is another one who I saw the other day. I was looking at who was on Portland that I was watching. Oh, Diego Budazzoni. And I noticed Jugnoth a couple of times doing some stuff that I saw Jugnoth do 2 years ago, but do it a little bit better and more often. I'd say the only real sort of maybe miss that I would have said I told you so a little bit at this point is Edward Schala. That's a guy who I really soured on as the season went on last year, and he has had a real struggle to really sort of capture what success he had as a young buck in Czechia. But overall, I mean, I think Seattle has done a really, really good job drafting, and they have set themselves up pretty well with some real solid options especially up front, especially at the forward position, I would say. Have you seen Jari Lassila? I have seen Jari Lassila. I don't think he's an NHL guy, but I think he could have a heck of a career in Finland. Skilled and pretty speedy, but I feel like he's a guy that needs space and big ice to do what he does. He was good at the World Juniors because, speed and skill and everything, and he just put the puck in front of the net for his teammates, and they, he had that, I think he had a beautiful overtime goal or some sort of, I don't remember specifically right now, but that was a really nice play that he had. But a lot of what he was doing was, they had big guys creating traffic or in traffic or in scoring positions, and he got the puck to them. So I like Lassila, but maybe a guy I invite to a camp. I don't think I would draft him, but I would see what he could do with an NHL prospect system. But I don't know. I feel like at the end of the day, you're going to get a solid career, but in Finland, out of him. What are your thoughts on Cal Ritchie? Honestly, I've really liked Cal Ritchie. I started a lot lower on him last year at the beginning of the year, but I think it turned out that he had been injured, fighting an injury at the beginning of the year, and the back half of his season I felt was way better. And a guy who I don't remember where he ended up on my list at the end of the day. I think he got drafted exactly where he was on my list. But he's a guy who I think plays a very projectable game to the NHL, skilled and mobile and can shoot, can do a whole bunch of stuff pretty well. And he's having a fantastic season with Oshawa this year. You can't deny that. Did you see the Karamaki lacrosse goal? I did not, but I believe it. I believe that he did. Do you think Teddy Stiga could be a high energy third liner at his peak? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable expectation for what he could be. Like we're watching Logan Stankoven in the NHL do what he's doing. I don't think Stiga's on that level at all, but that similar type of player, right? An undervalued guy because he's small, but the way that he plays, you throw him over the boards because he's going to try. And when he gets the puck, he can make offense happen, right? Like that's kind of what he does. So I've really liked Stiga this year. He's worked his way up my first round. I just, if you're not aware, on my GitHub page, I posted a free tool that you can use, Python code, to basically make your own draft rankings. So you just put a list of players that you want to rank in a sheet or in the program, and it'll ask you who you prefer between one or the other. So I do this periodically just to check myself, because guys might, it's hard to explain, but there might be guys that move around a certain range, or guys that you pick up on later that you really liked or have fallen off maybe, and they get into ranges where they probably don't really belong. So for me, I just like to just throw my list of players in the thing and go, if it were up to me, who am I taking, right? Like if it were up to me between A and B, who am I going with? And it was just recently updated to make it a little bit better. But I did that the other day, and one of the guys that jumped up the most was Teddy Stiga. Like Stiga was ranked 28th on my first list a month ago. He's at 18 now, which is, other than Igor Chernyshov, the highest jump of anyone in the first round. Oh, that's not true. Dominic Badinka moved up to 21 on my list, which might be a little high, but I just really, really like him. But yeah, so Stiga, I think energy guy, but a good one with some skill and some finish. I think he could be there. I prefer an end of season tournament with the teams that don't make the playoffs to decide the first overall pick. I agree. I think that would be really, really cool. I think the problem from the NHL's perspective would be that you're dividing the audience too much. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I get the feeling that also,
who qualifies to play that tournament?
Yeah,
that's
like,
the other
yeah.
problem with it. Like, where's the cutoff? Is it the bottom 16 teams? Is it the bottom 8? Is it the bottom 6? The bottom 4? Like, you have to account for all that, and then people, no matter what you do, people are gonna get mad. So make it random. That's the way I like it. Make it as random as possible, but weight it more in favor of the lower end teams.
Right.
Every pick a lottery pick, baby.
Yep, exactly.
But
I've seen a clip
idea.
of. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it is. I mean, I like the idea. I just think the execution is a little trickier, for sure. I've seen a clip of Khusnutdinov on Twitter where he defends really well with his skating and gap control. Seems like a modern day defensive defenseman, so I hope he doesn't try to compromise that. I mean, that's just what he is. Like, and that's totally true. With Khusnutdinov, that's always the thing that stuck out to me. Just a really, really good skater and applies it defensively really, really well. And like, he kind of reminded me of like a mini Alex Romanov, right? Like, I know, AJ, you're not a huge Alex Romanov guy, but in terms of like playing defensively, playing physically, using your feet well to defend and control gaps, and just keeping your passing game really simple, a guy like Khusnutdinov kind of checks all those boxes. Like, I think there's an outside chance he finds a role with Calgary, especially if they're going to continue to sort of shed guys and maybe retool a little bit on the fly. But I don't think there's like a massive potential player there, but just a solid guy, Who's the most under the radar forward and or defenseman in this year's draft? So I would say Alphonse Frey is the most under the radar defenseman. I have him in my top 10. I love him. I think he's great for what he is. Underrated forward. I mean, the guy that I have ranked highest relative to the average is Topias Heinonen, who has actually, I mean, I say heated up very loosely, but he has, he went down to the second division in Finland, played a couple of really good games there, came back up to the top level. And again, like, just a guy who plays the right way. I hate that I'm using that phrase, but he plays the right way. In a league where there isn't a ton of pace, in a league where there isn't a ton of high-end skill or whatever, Heinenen's a guy who I think is a good, energetic player who plays hard, plays smart, and I think has a lot of room to grow offensively. He shoots pretty well, better than a player with 1 goal this year you would think would score. And I just feel like Heinonen has been a good player all season long. That if you could get him outside the first round, like, he's 66th on European Central Scouting, which implies he may not even get drafted, which would shock me. I would be very surprised if that's what happened, because I just really, really like this guy. And he's the first name on my list that on average is not ranked, and he's in my late first round. But I don't know, I'll throw out one more maybe just because. Nah. No. Dominic Badinka might be another one because again, a guy playing pro hockey in Sweden, and he's playing like 20 minutes now a night for Malmo and not looking out of place doing it. I feel like if we're talking about, I did a game of, who did I do again? I did a game of someone else right before him, and I think it was Zane Parekh, and I did the game of Zane Parekh, and then I did the game of Dominic Badinka, and I just could not help but think that Dominic Badinka in the OHL would eat every player alive, like eat them alive defensively, and also produce pretty well offensively. Whereas Zane Parekh, instead of eating other players alive sometimes in his own end, he's eating with them. Like it's very strange. It's very different. Even though he has maybe a little bit more creative pass vision and plays a little bit more sneakily with the puck than Badinka does. But to me, like, if you ask me, I'm not looking for my defenseman to always be doing that. My defensemen, they need to play defense, and Badinka's a really, really good one at doing that from what I've seen so far this season, and I've been a big fan. Is Kiwi Haru playing? And this will be it for the show. Cool. Is Kiwi Haru playing? No, he has been injured for quite a while, but I saw that a little while ago, I saw a report that he was coming back this month, but because obviously it's February 29th, the month is now over and he hasn't come back. I imagine he's coming back before the end of the season. I'm on bated breath, to be honest with you. I'm waiting really, really patiently to see him again, because I really, I don't know what to do with him, and I just want to see him again. We got one more and then we'll go because we still have some time. Any opinion on Maxime Massé as a late first rounder and Chicoutimi's heater lately? I mean, I don't know. I've seen Maxime Massé a bunch of times. I'll see him again before the end of the season, obviously. But I just think that he's a guy who plays in a way that is like power forward in the NHL on like a third or second line, but in the queue, right? And to me, that is tricky. He's on pace for 75 points this year. Like, if a team drafts him in the first round, I think back to like a team drafting when Anaheim drafted Nathan Gaucher, who is not having the best start to his pro career with the AHL team in San Diego. But Chicoutimi, I mean, they are on a real heater lately, that's for sure. But with Massé, like, when I write notes on guys, I always leave watching a Massé game and go, all right, he made some little creative, sneaky passes through traffic in the offensive zone, but that's about it, right? Like that's about all I really note. So it's tricky with him. I haven't seen him in a little while. I'll do so again. I'll watch him again before the end of the year. But for me, he's a guy that's just not on my list because, again, like, maybe I'd have him ranked in my third round or something. But when I look at the guys that are ranked in my third round, they all excite me more. And they all kind of interest me a lot more, because with Massé, it's like, I'm not super interested in a QMJHL guy who doesn't really sort of push the pace much. He just kind of focuses on, the best parts of his game, or when someone passes him the puck and he finds a guy once in a while. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm totally asleep on him, and he's a guy who, the next time I see him, he'll be fantastic. But in the times I've seen him, I just haven't thought first round pick with him. Does that mean he's going to go in the first round? Probably. It's entirely possible, because NHL teams probably think if he's a third or fourth line power forward and we get that at 30, then we've done well with our draft pick and we get to keep our jobs. But to me, that, I find that, again, like a lot of the time with these players who end up unranked for me, there's just a long list of players ranked around the same area or later that I find excite me a lot more. And it just pushes them really far down for me. But, I'll check in on him again, because yes, Chicoutimi is on an absolute bender. It looks like they've won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 of their last 13 games. But that also comes on the heels of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8-game losing streak. So figure that one out for me. 8-game losing streak and then winning 12 of 13. I don't know. Weird stuff. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, we're done. 6 whole minutes. 6 whole minutes early. But thank you very much for joining us. It was a fun Leap Day special today. So who knows if we'll ever be doing a Leap Day show ever again. This might be the only one ever, which would be kind of fun. But anyway, we're brought to you by Fanatics. You can use our affiliate link below and scan the QR code to provide a kickback to the show on anything you buy in the store. We're also brought to you by Puck Preps Hockey, where you can get all your NCAA and CHL prospect needs from a big old staff of smart people. You can also help out by going to fractalhockey.com and checking out Fractal Hockey Consulting, which is my business for hand-tracked player analysis and recruitment packages for the NCAA Europe and beyond, or anything that anybody could possibly need. And of course, Scouching.ca, where you can get exclusive access to innovative data tools with tons of insight into draft prospects and players making their mark in the NHL. So, producer AJ, thank you again for hanging in there. You know, you're an ill man this week, but your assistance is always appreciated.
Go Leafs, go.
Yeah, can't wait to see them blow it against the Arizona Coyotes tonight. But
it's okay. Chychrun's not on Arizona anymore. We only have to suffer that pain for Ottawa.
Fair enough. All right.
That's what I think it is. That's what I think it was, honestly.
The juju around Jacob Chychrun, it's now gone.
But now it's in our division, so it's worse.
Right. Yes. Well, one team is far ahead of the other one, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We'll see you Monday night for another installment of Scouching Live. We'll see you around.